I went to the company party thinking I was just there to survive one more evening. When she looked at my hand and said she had been hoping I would take my ring off, I realized my life was already changing. At that moment, I was losing a marriage, questioning myself, and standing one step away from a future I never planned. This is the story of how everything fell apart quietly and came back together in a way I didn't expect. My name is David. I'm 35 years old. I work as a software developer in a mid-sized IT company, and I live in a rented apartment on the edge of the city, about 30 minutes from the office. Until recently, I thought my life was stable, predictable, normal. Now it feels like everything I built is slowly coming apart, quietly, without noise or drama. I've been married for 8 years. Or, more accurately, I was married. We are in the middle of a divorce. No shouting, no betrayal, no clear villain. Just two people who stopped talking and didn't know how to start again. The paperwork is moving forward. The lawyers talk more than we ever did in the last year. At home, the apartment feels empty even when someone else is there. That week at work was especially heavy. Deadlines, meetings, unread messages from my wife asking about things that no longer felt important. I stopped wearing my wedding ring a few days earlier. Not because I wanted to make a statement, but because every time I looked at it, it felt like a reminder of something I could not fix anymore. The company party was on Friday evening. An annual event. Music, food, polite smiles, people pretending to relax. I almost didn't go, but my manager insisted. He said it would be good for morale. I told myself I would show up, stay for one drink, and leave early. I arrived later than most. The office was transformed with lights and decorations, but it still felt like work. I stood near the bar, holding a glass I barely touched, watching people laugh too loudly. I felt older than 35, tired in a way sleep doesn't fix. That's when Amanda approached me. She works as an accountant in our office. 29. Smart, calm, always professional. We'd worked together for years, exchanged emails, small talk in the hallway, nothing more. I noticed her before, of course, but never allowed myself to think beyond that. She smiled and asked how I was doing. A simple question, but she didn't rush past it like most people do. She waited for an answer. We talked about work, about the party, about nothing important. Then her eyes dropped to my hand. I followed her gaze before I even realized why. She looked back up at me and said quietly, almost casually, "I've been hoping you'd take it off for a long time." For a second, I didn't understand what she meant. Then I did. My hand. The ring that wasn't there. I felt my chest tighten. Not with anger. With surprise. With something close to relief and fear mixed together. I didn't know what to say. I laughed awkwardly and said it was complicated. She nodded, as if she already knew. She didn't ask questions. She didn't push. She just said she was glad I came tonight. The conversation ended naturally. She joined a group of colleagues, and I stayed where I was, replaying her words in my head. I didn't feel flattered. I felt exposed. Like someone had noticed something I was trying to keep invisible. I left the party early, just like I planned. But on the drive home, I kept thinking about that moment. About how easily she said it. About how long she might have been waiting. At home, the apartment was quiet. I sat on the couch and stared at my hand again. The bare skin where the ring used to be felt strange, but also honest. For the first time in months, I didn't feel completely alone with what I was going through. I didn't know what would happen next. I only knew that something had shifted. Not at the party, but inside me. The end of my marriage felt final now, not just on paper. And for the first time, the idea of what came after didn't feel empty. The next morning at work felt different, even though nothing had actually changed. Same desk, same screen, same tasks waiting in my inbox. But my mind kept going back to the company party, to Amanda's voice, to the way she looked at my hand before she spoke. I told myself not to read too much into it. People say things at parties. People drink. People misjudge moments. Still, when I sat down at my desk, I noticed her before she noticed me. She was already working, focused, calm, like always. Nothing in her behavior suggested she had crossed any line the night before. That made it harder to ignore. The divorce process moved forward quietly. Emails from lawyers, documents to review, decisions about things that used to belong to both of us. My wife and I barely spoke now. When we did, it was practical and distant. There was no anger left, just exhaustion. In the evenings, I came home to an apartment that felt temporary, like I was only passing through my own life. At work, Amanda started stopping by my desk more often, always for a reason. A question about numbers, a clarification about a report, small things that made sense. But she stayed an extra minute each time, asked how my day was going, waited for the answer. One afternoon, she asked if I wanted to grab lunch outside the office. I almost said no out of habit. Instead, I said yes without thinking too much about it. We walked to a small cafe nearby. Nothing special. We talked about work at first, then about how long we'd both been at the company. She told me she liked the stability of accounting, that numbers made sense when people often didn't. At some point, I mentioned the divorce. Not the details, just that it was happening. She didn't interrupt. She didn't give advice. She just listened. When I finished, she said she was sorry and that it must be heavy to carry alone. That sentence stayed with me. Alone. After that, lunches together became normal. Not every day, just often enough to feel natural. Sometimes we talked about work. Sometimes about music, routines, plans we never followed through on. She never asked about my wife unless I brought it up. She never pushed for more than I was ready to give. One evening, we both stayed late to finish reports before a deadline. The office was almost empty. When we finally shut down our computers, it was dark outside. We walked to the parking lot together. She told me she had noticed my marriage changing long before the ring disappeared. That she could see it in the way I avoided personal conversations, the way I stayed late at work, the way I seemed tired even on good days. I didn't know what to say. I hadn't realized anyone was paying that much attention. She didn't say she waited for my marriage to end. She said she waited for me to be honest with myself. That night, driving home, I realized something uncomfortable. I was looking forward to seeing her. Not just at work. Not just in passing. I was waiting for those quiet moments when I could talk without feeling judged or fixed. The separation papers were signed a few weeks later. It wasn't dramatic. We met, exchanged documents, talked about logistics. When I left, I didn't feel free or broken. I felt finished. Amanda didn't celebrate. She didn't change how she treated me. If anything, she gave me more space. That made me trust her more. One Friday evening, I asked her if she wanted to have dinner after work. Not as colleagues. Not as a favor. She smiled and said yes, but only if we kept it simple. Dinner was calm. No big confessions. No promises. Just two people talking honestly. I told her I wasn't ready for anything serious. She said she wasn't in a rush. She said she just wanted to be present. When I got home that night, I noticed something new. The apartment didn't feel as heavy. Still quiet. Still temporary, but no longer empty in the same way. I realized that for the first time in a long while, someone wasn't trying to pull me forward or push me back. She was walking beside me, at my pace. That was when I understood what she meant at the party. It wasn't about the ring. It was about being ready to let go of something that was already gone. The first time we met outside the office without a clear reason felt strange in a quiet way. No expectations, no labels. Just dinner after work, like we agreed. I remember checking my phone more than usual that day, not because I was nervous, but because I didn't want to miss the moment it was time to leave. We chose a small restaurant not far from the office. Nothing romantic. Simple food, low noise, normal people around us. That helped. It made everything feel real, grounded. We talked about our week, about work frustrations, about small things that didn't matter much, but filled the space comfortably. At some point, the conversation slowed. I told her honestly that I still felt guilty, that even though my marriage was ending, part of me was afraid I was doing something wrong. Amanda didn't dismiss it. She said guilt was normal when you stayed too long in something that no longer worked. She said she didn't wait for my marriage to fail. She waited for me to stop pretending. That sentence stayed with me longer than I wanted to admit. After dinner, we walked for a bit before heading to our cars. There was no dramatic moment, no sudden decision. Just a quiet understanding that something had changed. When we said goodbye, she hugged me briefly. It was simple, respectful, and it felt heavier than anything else that night. From that evening on, things shifted naturally. We started seeing each other outside of work more often. Coffee on weekends. Walks after long days. Conversations that went deeper without feeling forced. We didn't talk about the future. We didn't define what we were doing. We just kept showing up. I noticed changes in myself before I noticed changes between us. I slept better. I stopped replaying old arguments in my head. At work, I was more focused. I finished tasks faster. My manager even commented that I seemed more present. Amanda never tried to replace anything from my past. She never compared herself to my wife. She asked questions, but she respected boundaries. When I pulled back, she didn't chase. When I opened up, she stayed. The first time she stayed over happened without planning. We watched a movie, talked until late, and when it was too late to drive home, she stayed. The next morning, she left early for work, leaving the apartment exactly as she found it. No messages, no pressure, just a quiet thank you. A few weeks later, she brought a toothbrush. That was when I realized how fast emotional closeness can grow when it's built on honesty instead of promises. We talked about our fears openly. I told her I was scared of repeating the same mistakes. She told me she was afraid of being a distraction instead of a choice. We argued for the first time over something small. Schedules. Misunderstood messages. It wasn't dramatic, but it was real. We talked it through instead of avoiding it. That alone felt new to me. One evening, I admitted something I hadn't said out loud before. That in my marriage, I often stayed silent to keep the peace. That I learned to disappear emotionally to avoid conflict. Amanda didn't judge me for it. She said silence can feel safe until it becomes lonely. Slowly, she started spending more time at my place. Not moving in, not claiming space, just being there. Cooking together. Grocery shopping. Folding laundry while talking about nothing important. Ordinary things that felt surprisingly meaningful. At work, we stayed professional. No public gestures. No rumors we couldn't control. Some people noticed, of course, but no one said anything directly. We handled it carefully, respectfully. One night, after a long day, I realized something simple but important. My apartment no longer felt temporary. Not because it changed, but because I wasn't alone in it anymore. The silence was different now. It wasn't empty. It was calm. I understood then that I had crossed a line. Not from marriage to another relationship, but from surviving to living. And for the first time since everything fell apart, I wasn't afraid of where things were going. Moving in together was not a sudden decision. It came after weeks of conversations that circled the same question without forcing an answer. We talked about money, habits, space, and expectations. Not late at night, not in emotional moments, but calmly, usually over coffee or during quiet walks. Amanda was clear that she didn't want to move in as a solution to anything. I was clear that I didn't want to repeat the pattern of avoiding difficult conversations. When we finally agreed, it felt less like a leap and more like a step that was already overdue. She didn't arrive with suitcases and boxes. She came with a few essentials at first. Clothes, a laptop, books. We decided to keep her apartment for a while, just in case. That choice alone removed a lot of pressure. Nothing felt final or forced. It felt chosen. Living together brought out details we hadn't seen before. Amanda liked structure. She planned her weeks, her expenses, her time. I was more flexible, sometimes careless. We disagreed about small things. Dishes, schedules, silence. But the disagreements didn't turn into distance. We talked, sometimes awkwardly, sometimes with pauses that felt uncomfortable. But we didn't pretend everything was fine when it wasn't. At work, we addressed our relationship professionally. We informed our manager, set boundaries, avoided situations that could create tension. There were looks, quiet assumptions, but no drama. I realized how different it felt to be honest instead of hiding. The energy I used to spend managing appearances was now available for actual work. The divorce process reached its final stage. I met my ex-wife one last time to sign the remaining documents. We spoke briefly. There was no bitterness left. Just two people acknowledging that what we had once built no longer fit either of us. When I walked out of that office, I didn't feel relieved. I felt complete. Like a chapter had ended without tearing pages out. Amanda didn't ask how I felt that night. She just made dinner and stayed close. That mattered more than questions. We started building routines together. Morning coffee, shared grocery lists, quiet evenings without needing entertainment. The apartment changed slowly. A plant by the window. A lamp moved to a better place. Small adjustments that made the space feel intentional instead of temporary. We argued more than before, but in healthier ways. Amanda challenged me when I avoided decisions. I challenged her when she planned too far ahead. We learned how each other reacted under stress. We learned how to pause instead of escalate. None of it was dramatic, but all of it was real. One evening, we talked about the future without making promises. Children, finances, career changes. Not as dreams, but as possibilities. Amanda was clear that she didn't want to build a life based on saving someone else. She wanted partnership, not rescue. Hearing that forced me to reflect on how much responsibility I took for my own happiness. I noticed changes in myself that surprised me. I stopped checking my phone constantly. I stopped replaying old conversations in my head. I laughed more easily. My work performance stabilized. I started planning again, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Months passed quietly. No big events. No turning points. Just consistency. And consistency, I realized, was what I had been missing for a long time. One night, while organizing a drawer, I found my old wedding ring. I hadn't seen it in months. I held it for a moment, expecting to feel something strong. I didn't. It was just an object tied to a version of myself that no longer existed. I put it back and closed the drawer without ceremony. Amanda noticed later and asked if I was okay. I told her I was. And for the first time, it was true without hesitation. I understood then that building something new wasn't about replacing the past. It was about learning from it and choosing differently. And for the first time in years, my life felt aligned with who I actually was. Time passed quietly, the way real life usually does when nothing is falling apart anymore. Days blended into weeks, weeks into months. There were no dramatic announcements, no sudden changes that demanded attention. Instead, everything settled into place slowly, almost carefully, as if life itself was testing whether we were ready to keep what we had built. Living with Amanda became ordinary in the best possible sense. We woke up at similar times, shared coffee in the mornings, talked about the day ahead without rushing. Sometimes we worked in silence, laptops open at opposite ends of the table. Sometimes we didn't talk much at all, and it didn't feel uncomfortable. Silence no longer meant distance. It meant trust. At work, things stabilized too. Our relationship stopped being a topic, even quietly. People adjusted. We stayed professional, consistent, reliable. I was promoted to lead a small team, something I had avoided before because I didn't want more responsibility. Now I welcomed it. I felt capable again. Focused. Present. Amanda remained herself. She didn't change to fit my life, and she didn't ask me to change for hers. We adjusted to each other instead. She helped me become more structured. I helped her become more flexible. When we disagreed, we talked. When we were tired, we rested. We stopped treating problems as threats and started treating them as tasks to solve together. One evening, after dinner, we sat on the couch talking about nothing important. At some point, the conversation shifted to the future. Not hypothetically, not vaguely, practically. We talked about where we wanted to live long term. About finances. About children. About timing. There were no grand promises, but there was clarity. We wanted the same things, even if we didn't rush toward them. A few weeks later, I cleaned out an old storage box I had been avoiding. Inside were documents, cables, forgotten objects from years ago. At the bottom, wrapped in a piece of cloth, was my wedding ring. I held it in my hand longer this time. Not because I missed my marriage, but because I wanted to understand what it meant to me now. It didn't represent failure. It didn't represent love either. It represented a chapter that had ended exactly when it needed to. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel regret. I felt done. I threw it away that night. Amanda noticed when she took out the trash the next morning. She didn't say anything at first. Later, while we were having coffee, she asked quietly if I was okay. I told her I was. I told her it felt right. She smiled, not proudly, not possessively, just peacefully. That mattered more than words. Life didn't suddenly become perfect. We still had stressful weeks, unexpected expenses, misunderstandings. But the difference was simple and clear. I no longer felt like I was carrying everything alone. And I no longer felt like I was pretending to be someone I wasn't. Months later, we signed a lease together. A different apartment. Brighter. Closer to work. It wasn't symbolic. It was practical. And that made it meaningful. We moved without ceremony. Just boxes, lists, shared decisions. One evening, while unpacking, Amanda looked at me and asked if I was happy. Not excited. Not hopeful. Happy. I thought about it for a moment before answering. I told her yes. Not because my life looked good from the outside, but because it finally felt stable on the inside. I understood then that my life didn't improve because my marriage ended. It improved because I stopped living in something that no longer fit me and allowed myself to move forward honestly. Amanda didn't save me. She met me at a moment when I was ready to change, and we built something real from there. Now, when I think back to that company party, to the moment she looked at my hand and spoke, I don't hear it as a bold confession. I hear it as a quiet truth spoken at the exact right time. My life didn't restart. It continued. And for the first time in a long while, it finally made sense.